I trust everyone had an insightful evening last night. We had a fascinating conversation at our dinner, and I said it last night and I'll say it again. We are so glad you're here. Thank you for showing up for your organizations, for each other, and for yourselves. Leadership has never been easy, and it's especially difficult in our VUCA world when organizations are going through significant change. And here to talk to us today about exactly that are Chris Jensen, Executive Vice President and Chief People Officer of NXP Semiconductors, and Dana Larson, Vice President of Global Talent and Organization Development. Thank you both for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chris, why don't you begin by grounding us in some context, the size and scope of NXP,
Sure.
and the leadership transition you've been going through.
Sure. So we are probably not a name that many of you know. We are a very limited, publicly known $13 billion company. We've got about 33,000 employees worldwide, spread across 30 countries around the globe. And the way I would describe you, or to you, in terms of what we do as a company is in three things. So if you think about your car, right? And you think about the software-defined vehicle, you think about all of the safety and security that's in your car around the radar, around driver assist, around motor control. We power much of that for all of the automakers around the world. Second is, if you think about from an industrial perspective, which is our second biggest market, if you think about running a building, running this building and managing the air in this building, we have the semiconductors and the software enablement that allows for smart building, or allows for better efficiency from a building perspective. The best one that I always use, though, when you go to CVS or Starbucks or Chick-fil-A and you pay with your mobile device, that's our technology that's in those phones that's allowing you to communicate with that machine, so you can do your payment there. It's the technology that we developed for all of the phone makers. That's the easiest way to think about us.
Thank you for that. Big fan of the Chick-fil-A
love
mobile
it.
app.
I love it.
It's the biggest hack there is.
I love it. And let me talk a little bit about the transition we're doing. So about 15 months ago, our CEO and president came to the board and said that he was ready to retire in 2025. And his goal was to retire actually right in the summertime of 2025. And it got our board a little bit nervous because they weren't expecting that. And he's 56 years old. He's been in the job for 5 years. But the grind of all the travel, the grind of being a CEO of a large public company just really, frankly, caught up with him after a 30-year career at the company. And so we've been going through now this transition of assessing external candidates, assessing our internal bench, seeing if there's team members internally to run the company. The board ultimately made a decision. In April of last year, we put one of my colleagues into the president role, and then he subsequently became the CEO last November. So for myself, for Dana, for the rest of the team, we've been navigating this transition of outgoing CEO, known internal incumbent that's going to become president and CEO, and now transitioning into the stage with that CEO. And probably one of the biggest nuances that we have in this transition is the former CEO was based in Germany, and he was German. The new CEO is Hispanic from California. And so we have a complete different way of thinking in terms of cultural background, in terms of how they might approach things, language, so on and so forth. And so those are the nuances that the team has been navigating through as we've made this change.
Yeah, so there's cultural differences, different communication preferences, perhaps different focus of vision and articulation of values. It's a lot to navigate. So Dana, why do leadership transitions often feel so destabilizing, even when they are planned?
Yeah, I think, and we've all experienced this, right? I mean, I think most of us have experienced, if it's not a leadership transition, it is some other kind of significant organizational transition. And it's like a cultural contract has to be rewritten, because now you're in this space of not really knowing, is the way I operated going to be sufficient in the future? CEOs have a tendency to bring on new expectations, new views of performance and what they want to do with an organization. So it really can throw people off balance. It can throw an entire organization off balance if it's not managed well. So that's part of the challenge.
Yeah, I think the other piece that I think we also face, and it makes it destabilizing besides the unknown, and what does it mean for those of us in the organization, is when you're working with a leader and they're coming in, you often try to pull them back a little bit, right? You say, don't go too fast. Don't make too many declarative statements. Make sure to get out in the organization, listen, learn, right? Don't come in that first 90 days and just, this is the edict and this is the declarative statement. But that's contrary to what the organization wants, because the organization wants clarity. Mm-hmm. So on one hand, we actually, as partners to the leader, any leadership change that's happening, we create a little bit of challenge in the organization because we want that leader to go slow. We want them to make sure to learn. We want to make sure that they kind of maybe go on a listening tour. But on the other hand, all of us that sit in the organization, can you please give us some clarity? Can you please tell me what the expectations are? Are we going to change the strategy? And so that becomes a little bit of a challenge that destabilizes things, especially in that first, say, 90 to 180 days.
Mm-hmm. That's a bit of a paradox.
Yeah, and the moment that people start guessing, you're already losing speed. Our summit this year is focused on courage, trust, clarity, and speed. Dana, what do those look like in practice?
Courage, clarity, and speed. These are really important words. Chris didn't cover it at the beginning when he talked about where we were already headed when the leadership transition started. But we had already begun a cultural transition. There was an aspiration that was established that we were going to become unstoppable, right? That we needed to become unstoppable given the direction of the marketplace, the pace of technology, that there was no way that we were going to be successful in the long run if we continued doing things the way we were doing them. And so one of the first things that we ran into when this whole concept of unstoppable was, just think about that word. What does it actually mean? Well, it could mean a lot of things depending upon the context that you're in. And so the first challenge we ran into was immediately everyone started asking, well, what does unstoppable mean? What does unstoppable mean? This is so tell us what that actually looks like. How does that show up? And you can describe it in terms of organizational outcomes or results, be out ahead of the market, et cetera. Those are all, and that's all good. And I think we would all agree that that's important. But how do you get there from the standpoint of behavior? What exactly does the behavior look like that is unstoppable or gets us to that next point? So with that challenge and with the new leader coming on, like I said, we'd been on the journey for a while. The concept of unstoppable had been out there, but we were still getting these lingering questions. When the leader came on board, he started to use some language and he wasn't specifically defining unstoppable, but he was talking about what was really important to him. And he started using words like speed, ownership, innovation. And then he would describe what he thought speed looked like behaviorally within the organization. He talked about what ownership would look like behaviorally, like how does it show up? And we grabbed it. Chris can talk a little bit about when he started, first hearing those words, but we grabbed it and we said, okay, unstoppable. Core elements, speed, ownership, innovation. And these were just words that the new CEO was starting to utilize in the organization. So we said, okay, how can we be quick in adapting to this leader while also helping to clarify for the organization this concept of unstoppable at a behavioral level that people could actually put into practice?
And I think for us, we were fortunate, and I really do believe that having an internal leader ascend to our CEO versus bringing in somebody from the outside, I think we were super fortunate because the speed and the clarity, we were able to box it a little bit. As a leader that was already in the organization, there's no way the new CEO could come in and start changing everything. because he was part of building the strategy before. And that would completely create a challenge for him if he changed the strategy to the right or changed the values of the company. So then for us, the speed came about, how do you define the amplifications? As Dana said, the speed, ownership, and innovation, because those were the amplifications of the behavior that he wanted to see, but it wasn't a complete redraw. My fear on the other side, especially as we were going through the process, is, oh my gosh, because I was part of the engagement with the board, so I was looking at the candidates that were coming in to talk with the board, and I was going, oh my gosh, if it's that person, I know the speed they're gonna go at. Everything's gonna change, and it's gonna change in 48 hours. And this entire management team is gonna change in 72 hours, right? So I think we had a little bit of an advantage, and I'm really thankful for that advantage of having an internal leader, because then we could focus on the elements we really wanted to push based on the amplification that he was doing, because he can't change everything. Otherwise, it would completely make him ineffective as a new leader.
So for senior HR leaders and CHROs, whether it's an internal or an external leader, what are the signals that you should be paying attention to as a transition starts?
To me, it is getting into the routine. And what I ended up doing with him is I frankly shadowed him. My entire 6 months was really shadowing him every chance I had. If he would go talk to a customer, I'd find a way. Is there a way I can go with him to the customer? Because I want to see the language that he uses when he talks to customers. When he starts getting internal meetings going and talking to the team, or he talks to leaders in the company, what's the language that he's using? So for me, it became a view of listening and what's the cues that he's giving. What types of questions is he asking? Because those questions point you in a direction of what's on his mind, what he believes is important, what he believes is non-negotiable, and really trying to gauge on those elements that really he was focused on. Because that started to write a little bit of the playbook of where we needed to focus our energy. It became very clear, and we had a fortunate, not fortunate. It's a little bit challenging when you name the new leader and the old leader's still in the organization, but that's okay. We worked our way through it. But the fortunate piece of that is we had 6 months where he was getting ready, and we could shadow him and we could listen to the language that he was using, because that gave us all of the cues that we needed to focus as we tried to then bring the message back into the company.
And that was a really interesting time. If you were on Chris's team, we would get these notes. He wasn't keeping it to himself. So as he was shadowing our new CEO, we were getting notes almost on a daily basis for a little while where he's saying, I'm hearing him say, and he'd send us a list of phrases, right? And over time, this started to kind of congeal into a kind of a core message and direction that we could actually start working with. So I started thinking about, okay, if these are the important things for this new leader, right? We're going to align that to unstoppable. And now it causes us to start thinking about, all right, well, where are we now relative to those things, right? So it starts to get you thinking about your assessment strategy, how you're using the data that are available to you, where you maybe don't know something, where you want to go collect some more data. And so that was kind of another key knock-on effect from the listening strategy that Chris described.
And going back to clarity and speed, which we were talking about earlier, how do you create clarity when strategy is still forming, and what tends to get in the way of speed even when urgency is high?
I think when you think about creating clarity is you need to go with what you know and what's cemented. And I think one of our challenges, and I think all of us face it regardless of the types of roles we're in, is how much does the plan need to be baked? At what point do you get comfortable that there's enough that's stable, there's enough that is going to not change, so that you can push that out to the organization, or you can push that out to your leadership team, and finding that right balance of, listen, it's 70% there, and we know this vector won't change and this vector won't change, so let's just go with this. Because the organization, we all know in this time of change, your appetite is insatiable. You want every little nugget you can get your hands on. And so if we can start feeding elements into the organization, even if we don't know all of it, then I think we should do that. I also, though, think you then need to complement complement that to say, well, these are the things I don't know. These are the things that we're going to still make a decision on. And here's the timing of when I think I'm going to make that decision. I'm going to make that decision in the second quarter, or we'll make that decision in the third quarter. I need some time to reflect. I need to talk to more customers. I need to talk to the board. Whatever it is, you can frame a little bit and give that clarity to the organization.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And there's no need to wait. For some of the core messages, there's no need to wait. And one of the unique challenges, well, not unique, it's probably a fairly common challenge, we have a voracious appetite for wordsmithing in our organization, right? Just voracious, right? So, and that can delay
Consensus
messaging
building
by-
wordsmithing is actually what you
well,
meant to say.
Yeah, consensus building. And I think there is a point at which you have to recognize that you're delaying messages that can actually be incredibly helpful to the organization just for the sake of perfection, right? We just want to get it exactly right. Now, in some instances, you have to get it exactly right? You do. But if you're talking about concepts like unstoppable, speed, ownership, and innovation, okay, if you adjust a word 3 or 4 months down the line when you realize, oh, this might be a better way to describe it, have you really done any damage, right? And wouldn't it be better to move forward with the theme rather than wait for that theme to be perfectly articulated? And I feel like, but for us, that whole concept of speed, the reason why that's so important to us is culturally, that's not a strength for us. We have a tendency to want to gather all opinions, all input, and it takes forever to get things done sometimes. So this was also an opportunity for us to practice a little bit of what that expectation. So we've moved a little quicker on some of the recent messaging than we normally would. And I think it makes people a little uncomfortable. The comms people, I'm like fending them off, because they want to get in there and they want to rewrite, everything. Right. So there's a time when you say, enough. It's good enough.
That's helpful framing, that clarity doesn't require completeness. In our conversations, Chris, you've talked about a confidence gap. How does that show up in organizations?
Yeah, I'll give you an example of how it shows up for us. We do a lot of surveying, as many of you do, or listening channels, depending on what frame you want to put it in terms of gathering feedback from team members. And one of the elements that we see from our team members is we see this lack of confidence in our ability to execute towards our aspirations. So as we dissect their feedback, what they tell us is, we believe in the aspiration. We call it a North Star. So we have a North Star, which is our long-term aspiration. We believe in our aspiration. We believe where we're going from a strategic standpoint, but we actually don't believe that collectively we can execute to get there. And so Dana and the team, they kind of started going and really digging through the data. And what we saw in that confidence is our team members said, listen, because we're not fast, because we don't drive the right level of ownership, because we do consensus building and we bring more people into the process to take less risk, the more people I have that were part of the consensus, the less risk it has on me as an individual, then we slow things down. And so that confidence feedback from our employee was really interesting to see, because it was so much linked to our inability to execute to our aspiration is driven by the fundamental way we operate in the organization and the behaviors we demonstrate. And so now we have the ability to start looking at that and saying, okay, how are we going to start addressing the consensus building, the risk taking? And is that changes in leadership? Is that changes in feedback? Is that changes in rewards and our incentive programs? What do we need to do to start changing the way that the organization is going to operate?
Yeah, and I think there's a deeper point in what you're saying. Clarity creates stability, but consistency creates belief. And without that belief, organizations don't just slow, they lose conviction. At these inflection points, Dana, some leaders tend to step forward while others retreat. What makes the difference, and how do HR leaders earn credibility when the focus shifts to growth and profitability?
Well, let me kind of address that last point first with regard to leaders in HR specifically. I'm not going to say anything groundbreaking here, because at least in my 30 years of practice, we've been talking about the need for HR professionals to earn a seat at the table. We've used that. All of us have used that term. But I will say that I've had a chance to kind of observe the way Chris does things. He's actually been associated with the senior leadership team for quite a while, and having a chance to really listen to the knowledge that he brings about the business it's pretty remarkable, actually. Understanding the products, understanding to some extent the technology behind the products and the process that goes into creating the products, understanding the markets we serve, understanding our customers and their needs, knowing how all of this interacts together. I mean, to be able to engage at a business level, you need that business knowledge. It isn't sufficient to come forward with an expertise in HR, systems and processes. I mean, that's a necessary but insufficient to really be able to engage at that level. So I think from an influence perspective, if you really want to influence in that space, it requires doing one's homework, really doing one's homework. Now, you don't have to be a technical expert. You don't have to be the engineer that designs the product, but you at least have to have fundamental understanding of what those engineers do, right? It's really been amazing to watch. And actually, I think our leadership team is actually very surprised because they're not used to seeing that.
It's almost like the last conversation, right? Getting the CEO to sit down and do an agent, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of the reverse of that, right? So, and how do we as HR professionals learn the elements of the business? But to Dana's point, we've been talking about this for years, right? The importance of the way to influence is through understanding of the business, and I think that's very much true.
Yeah.
Well, now we're getting into Q&A. So last question for each of you. I had a spicy surprise, but maybe we'll jump that into the Q&A. So Dana, if you could give one piece of advice to leaders facing an upcoming transition, what would it be? And what is one thing that leadership teams or senior HR leaders should do immediately to turn that into momentum?
Well, I'm going to come at this from a unique perspective because I think it's really important that we take full advantage and leverage the data that are available to us. Data that have been collected, data that we don't think have been collected, looking at new ways to get perspective from the organization. I think it's sometimes, and I think in this particular situation, we brought some data forward in a way that the leaders had not looked at it before. And it was a little bit of a slap in the face. I actually felt bad at first, and I think Chris asked me one time, is there any good news? And I was like, well, yeah, it's good that we're learning this, right? It's good that...
Sure the heck didn't feel like it.
It's good that we're learning this. But if the methodology is sound, the data have been collected in a way that create validity, right? Then there's no reason not to utilize it and really benefit from it. So I would say for me, I've always been a real believer in data, but particularly in this situation, it's like, wow, this kind of got the organization's attention. All of a sudden you had individuals sitting up and going, ooh, we hadn't thought about it that way before, and it caused a pretty significant shifts in thinking. Now, whether we end up where we want to be is still a matter of execution.
Maybe just to add some context to what Dana's saying, think of it as the comparable to McKinsey's Organizational Health Index, right? So bringing that sort of data into the organization and sitting down with the leaders to show them the connections between the culture, the climate, the behavior, and the performance of the company. So that just put that in a little bit of a frame.
Yeah. And be willing to do something different with what you collect as well. Our employee engagement survey, we do like clockwork every year, right? But we realized during this period of transition, you know what, maybe we should use the measure a little differently. Maybe we should probe in a few key areas relevant to speed, ownership, and innovation, rather than going with our normal set of questions. And that gave us, and in some places, we weren't even asking for, well, give us what's working and not working. In some places, for example, we used a branching on an item related to process efficiency. And that's basically, if the individual completing the survey rates that item neutral or negative, then we're going to give them a chance to comment. Because all we want to know is what they see is wrong. with our process efficiency, which is a kind of an indicator of speed for us. So, so being willing to kind of look at some sacred cows about how we do things and say, you know what, we're going to change it up. We'll probably go back to the way we do it in other years, but why not? Use it as a mechanism. Folks are already familiar with it, and take full advantage of it. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Speed, ownership, turning transition into momentum. We've got a few minutes for Q&A. What questions do you all have? Shaquille in the back.
When you mentioned about shadowing the CEO and noting down their phrases, everything else, something popped up in my head saying, Mark Zuckerberg recently announced that he's going to create an AI CEO for Meta. It is, yeah. So just by shadowing, how do you see that as a likelihood in the future?
Way outside my area of expertise. I think we actually had this conversation at dinner, for those of you at dinner last night, right? And we talked about AI for a pretty extended period of time. And I think certainly the possibilities are all there. Whether you can get to the point where it's a true CEO and it has the contextual understanding to make the responsible decisions that the CEO would normally make would be a question for me. And by the way, I think that's for any role that we have AI or have agents now doing work for us, is do they get to the point where they have the right context? Did you onboard them and do the assimilation of them in your culture and all the elements of your organization so that their persona really does represent the way a team member or a leader in your organization would think and act? It's a big question, at least in my organization, we haven't seen the fruits of yet.
Other questions? Thank you, Shaquille. Oh, good. No, I have 3
Make
minutes.
up for your
I
time,
have 3
heard.
minutes, Eugene. And therefore, I get to do my spicy peppers. Okay. Oh, no, where are they? Ha ha. They're in the lid. Okay. Who tuned in to the Culturati Live in October with Chris and Dana? Anybody? Yeah. Okay. So Chris introduced the concept of spicy dialogues, and he said, listen, we're trying to invite more dissent in our organization, and I literally brought in a bowl of peppers, put it in the middle of our table, and said, let's go. No one should get hurt, but this should signal that we're going deep. So I'm going to turn the tables, actually. I want each of you to ask the other one spicy question.
Wow. All right. Man, she did turn the tables. This was totally off a script at the moment. I would say, Dana, if there was something that you could go back and change over the last 12 months with this transition, what would you change? What would you do? What would you say we should do? Not for you specifically, but what should we do differently or should have done differently over the last 12 months?
Well, we had a lot of opportunities to align leaders. So before the transition, there were a variety of processes that were put into place. We did some transformation journeys with our core leadership team within the organization, which enabled a lot of opportunity. I think the thing that has been missing for me, or at least I look back on it and go, boy, why didn't we do that before? Why did it take the emergence of a new CEO for us to fully define unstoppable? And so I still think about that even to this day. It's like, why did it take that? But I think that's the point of our message here. Sometimes that is what you need to give it some oomph, if it's the technical term, oomph, to get things really, really moving. And I think in this case that was required. It was required because now we have someone who can, comes forward with some really excellent, strong expectations, very clear, We can tie to it, we make Unstoppable real, and we can move forward from there. But I wonder, why couldn't we have done that before?
All right, double hot seat. Question for Chris.
Okay.
I was hoping the clock was going to be at
Yeah,
zero.
I've got 9 seconds here, so just playing it out.
The MCs don't need the full 5.
Yeah. No, I think, what do you think it's going to take going forward to keep our leadership fully engaged? The tendency can be for leaders to look at these things as initiatives rather than shifts in expectations or behavior. What do you think it's going to take? And maybe focus on it from the senior leadership team perspective.
I think it's going to take our new CEO, who's, by the way, been in the role for 5 months now. I think it's going to take him holding to the extreme somebody accountable for it. I think he's going to have to do a visible, if someone's not adapting to the expectations that he has now, that we'd have for an unstoppable culture, and how we drive the speed, ownership, and elements, I think he's going to have to fundamentally take a really hard stand, and a very visible hard stand, to reinforce, I'm serious about this.
Yeah.
All right, fabulous job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the peppers.
Thank you.
Super.